He told me my comfortable life was over just like that. Then, my mother-in-law walked into my kitchen and screamed so loud the neighbors must have thought the world was ending. But the truth? My world was just beginning. My name is Mary Ann, and I want to tell you about the Friday night Leonard. My husband looked at me with that chillingly calm expression, his eyes like steel, and declared that my days of living comfortably at his expense were officially over. He said it in the very living room we bought, a home that stood on the foundation of the money I inherited from my incredible Grandma Teresa. His voice was a flat, emotionless line, as if he were signing a business contract, not severing the delicate balance of our marriage. Some humiliations don't hit you like a slap. They seep in a silent poison, slowly paralyzing you before you even realize what's happening. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Like everything you do, every effort, every sacrifice simply doesn't count? It's a devastating feeling, and the worst part is you get used to it. Little by little, it becomes your normal until one day, something just snaps. Believe me, you won't want to miss what happens when a woman finally gets tired of enduring everything and decides it's time to start charging for her worth. It all truly began after his parents, Veronica and Mr. Charles Bennett, left that Friday evening. Every other Friday, they'd come to visit their son. In reality, it meant I spent at least 6 grueling hours cooking, cleaning, arranging flowers, and ensuring every single corner of the house was spotless. Why? So Veronica could perform her meticulous inspection and then deliver one of her signature passive-aggressive jabs about my little graphic design hobby. She loved to say it was nice I had something to keep me busy, as if my actual job, my passion, wasn't real work. That night, the conversation inevitably drifted to how we'd managed to buy such a beautiful house in the suburbs outside New York City. Leonard, chest puffed out with a ridiculous amount of pride, rambled on about his hard work, his vision, his wise investments, conveniently omitting the uncomfortable truth that most of the substantial down payment had come directly from my inheritance. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, he turned to me with that arrogant smirk I'd grown to despise. "Sweetheart," he began, "starting with the next payment, we'll have separate budgets. Your comfortable life at my expense is over." He delivered the words with the calm confidence of a man who believed he had everything under control. He expected me to break down, to beg, to cry. But all I felt was a chilling clarity down my spine. The sheer injustice of his words hit me like a revelation, a truth that had always been there, just hidden beneath the surface, now glaringly visible. I was the one burning the midnight oil, working until 2 in the morning on my tablet, designing logos, editing videos, completing freelance projects for my clients. I was the one meticulously managing the household accounts, doing the shopping, paying the bills, and decorating every single room with my taste, and yes, my money. Every single Sunday, I cooked what felt like a feast for his parents, appetizers, a main course, dessert, only to face Veronica's inevitable critique about the sauce or the way the meat was cooked. To them, all of it was invisible. They saw it as my duty, something expected, never appreciated. My financial contributions, even if they sometimes varied, were dismissed as a mere whim. And my inheritance? Treated as pure luck that didn't count, something Leonard conveniently chose to forget. In that moment, everything became agonizingly clear. He didn't see me as his partner, his equal. He saw me as a luxury employee, a woman he was supporting. I remembered the very first time that sense of invisibility truly took root. It was our first Sunday lunch in this house. I had spent 2 full days preparing a roasted pork using Grandma Teresa's cherished recipe. I was excited, proud, so eager to please. When Veronica took her first bite, she simply said, "It's a bit dry. Next time, let me supervise you so it turns out better." Leonard said nothing. He just lowered his head and kept eating, a faint, approving smile playing on his lips toward his mother. That day I understood. Every Sunday would be a test, and I was destined to fail. My kitchen, my creative space, my refuge, had been transformed into a courtroom. I was always the accused, never allowed to defend myself. The very quartz countertop I'd chosen and paid for with my own money seemed to mock me, a silent witness to my ignored efforts and my steadily growing resentment. So, when Leonard hurled that phrase at me that Friday, I could see it in his eyes. He expected a scene. His posture, the slight clench of his jaw, everything screamed he was ready for a confrontation. He wanted my tears, my anger, the same old fight that always ended with him playing the magnanimous, powerful one, setting boundaries. I'm sure he already had his pre-rehearsed speech ready about financial responsibility and how it was all for our own good. He wanted to reassert himself as the provider, the head of the household, a role his parents had relentlessly drilled into him. But that night, the woman he thought he knew, the one who silently endured criticism and tirelessly tried to please everyone, was simply gone. Something profound shifted inside me. It wasn't a planned decision. It was like a forgotten spark, ignited deep within my mind. All the pain, all the years of humiliation, condensed into a single, sharp, incandescent idea. The frantic voices in my head went utterly silent. I no longer tried to justify him, to understand him, or to blame myself. Only an absolute, powerful silence remained, a silence brimming with possibility. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in a very long while, I didn't see the man I'd fallen in love with. I saw a stranger, meticulously acting out the role his mother had so carefully written for him. And in that profound silence, I found my answer. To his utter astonishment, I smiled. It wasn't forced or sarcastic. It was real calm, almost a feeling of sweet relief. I looked up and said softly, "Excellent idea, darling. It's about time we had some financial clarity." His reaction was almost comical. He just stared at me, mouth slightly agape, unsure if I was serious or mocking him. He blinked several times, his confusion almost palpable, while I kept my tone steady, confident, unyielding. There would be no war that night, no tears. Instead, I offered him my best weapon, my composure. I picked up my tablet from the coffee table, the very same one where I spent countless hours working, and turned it on. The soft glow of the screen illuminated my face. "Let's begin," I said. "How about we make a list of shared and individual expenses? That way, everything will be perfectly ready for the next payment cycle. I want this to be fair for both of us." His confusion morphed into something closer to fear. He wasn't prepared for this. Not for my unwavering calmness, not for my ruthless efficiency. He had wanted drama, a spectacle, but I had given him a business meeting. Within seconds, the power had shifted, and he didn't even notice. That night, Leonard slept soundly beside me, but I couldn't sleep a wink. My tablet rested on my lap, but I wasn't working for a client. I was working on something far more important, my escape plan. I made a detailed, exhaustive list of every single household task I performed. Meal planning, grocery shopping, cleaning, budgeting, coordinating maintenance, every invisible job that kept our life running seamlessly. Next to each task, I meticulously researched how much people in New York City charge for those same services. A personal chef, a professional housekeeper, a dedicated household manager, an event planner. The numbers added up, one by one, until they formed a truly surprising total. That's when I knew exactly what I would do. My plan for Sunday lunch began to take shape, a plan that was both exquisitely beautiful and utterly terrifying. The clarity Leonard claimed to want was about to arrive, though certainly not in the way he'd imagined. Saturday morning, the house felt strangely different. The air was still, heavy with a quiet tension. There were no clattering pots, no enticing smell of spices, no frantic rush of me trying to make everything absolutely perfect. Leonard came downstairs expecting to find me in the kitchen, perhaps regretful, maybe even worried. Instead, he found me sitting serenely on the patio sofa, a cup of coffee warming my hands, my tablet resting casually on my lap. He stared silently, waiting for me to speak, for some sign of the woman he knew. I looked up and smiled, a calm, almost serene smile. "Good morning, darling," I said. I slept wonderfully. His face was absolutely priceless. He didn't understand anything. Peace had become my new, most potent weapon, and he had no defense against it. He didn't realize that the woman he had humiliated the night before no longer existed. In her place sat a strategist, a woman who had spent the entire night calculating the exact price of her freedom. All day, he tried to provoke me, throwing out barbed comments about how nice it must be to enjoy my day off, as if he didn't know my weeks were filled with endless work and sleepless nights. At one point, while I was deeply focused on one of my designs, he walked behind me and said mockingly, "Good thing you have time for your little drawings." Each word from him dug a deeper chasm between us. In the past, phrases like that would have wounded me, made me feel guilty or lazy. But now, every comment was just another line item in the mental invoice I was drafting. I listened without reacting, nodding with a calm serenity that I knew was driving him absolutely crazy. And in my mind, I quietly added an extra charge for emotional damage. He didn't realize he was no longer talking to his wife, but to a service provider about to hand him her bill. His arrogance was the very fuel feeding my new, unyielding determination. That afternoon, I went to the grocery store, but it wasn't the usual weekend shopping trip. There were no pork ribs for his father, no expensive wine his mother adored, no exotic ingredients for those grand family feasts. This time, I walked the aisles with a completely different purpose. I bought Greek yogurt just for me, a succulent salmon fillet, fresh avocados, bursting blueberries, and a specialty coffee I truly loved. Every item I placed in the cart was a silent declaration of independence. At the checkout, I paid with my own card and felt a small, but incredibly powerful surge of satisfaction. It was the first time in a long while that I had bought food simply for me, for my taste, my health, my needs. It was a simple gesture, yet it felt like the crucial first step toward reclaiming my space, not just in this house, but in my own life. When I got back and began putting away my groceries, I stood for a moment, simply looking at the kitchen. That dream kitchen, with its beautifully veined white quartz island and gleaming stainless steel appliances, was my pride and joy. I had designed it myself, chosen every single detail, from the cabinet handles to the perfect lighting. And above all, I had paid for it with a large portion of the money Grandma Teresa had left me. I remembered what she told me the day she handed me the inheritance papers. "It's for you to build your independence, sweetheart. Not anyone else's and not out of guilt." A wave of guilt formed in my chest as I thought about how I had betrayed her, how I had allowed my investment to become the stage for my own servitude. But that guilt quickly solidified into a decision, as firm and unyielding as steel. I would honor her memory, and this kitchen would become the place where my independence was gloriously reborn. As the sun began to set behind the towering buildings of New York City, doubt tried to sneak into my mind. I sat on the porch, wondering if I was being too drastic. Maybe I should talk to him, try just one more time to make him understand. But then, like a cold ghost, last Christmas flashed back to me. I had spent 3 exhausting days cooking for 20 of his relatives. I was utterly exhausted but felt a quiet satisfaction until I heard Veronica whisper to her sister, "Poor Leonard. He works so hard while Marianne just plays house." No one, not a single soul, defended me. Leonard, standing right beside her, simply smiled. That memory, it instantly erased any and all hesitation. No, I wasn't being drastic. I was being fair. For the very first time, I was putting myself first. That Saturday's dinner was an odd, almost surreal scene. I ordered a fresh, vibrant salad from a nearby restaurant, just for myself. Leonard looked at me, clearly expecting me to offer him some, but I didn't. He quietly got up and made himself a sad ham and cheese sandwich, using the oldest, driest bread he could find in the pantry. We ate in a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the faint clinking of silverware. He expected me to speak first, to find the quiet unbearable, and eventually break down, crying or yelling. But I savored every single bite of my salad with a calm that was entirely new to me, tasting the delicious flavor of my self-assertion. He had asked for separate budgets and clear rules, and I was giving them to him, to the letter. What he didn't understand was that his desperate attempt to control me had, in fact, set me free. The cage he had meticulously built for me had opened wide, and I was learning to fly again, right here inside my own home. Sunday morning arrived with an eerie, profound peace. I woke early as always, but instead of rushing to the kitchen to marinate meat or prepare dessert, I made myself a soothing cup of tea and went out to the patio to read. The city's sunlight began to warm the air, and the house was wrapped in complete silence. There were no clanging pots, no fragrant smell of frying garlic, only the sweet song of birds and the soft whisper of the breeze. For the first time in many, many years, a Sunday morning didn't feel like the start of another unpaid workday. It felt like what it was supposed to be, a day of rest. I felt a deep, profound peace, the kind that comes when you know you are about to reclaim what is rightfully yours. Leonard came downstairs around 9. His eyes scanned the spotless, empty kitchen, and a distinct line of worry appeared on his forehead. "Don't tell me you're not cooking. My parents are coming at 1, Leonard said, his voice almost childish, like a kid afraid his birthday party was about to be canceled. I looked at him over the top of my book and replied, as naturally as if we were discussing the weather. "No, sweetheart. Sunday lunches were part of my household management services. And since we now have separate budgets, that service comes with a fee. If you'd like to hire me, we could discuss the rates." His expression shifted rapidly, from confusion to disbelief, then to barely contained anger. I could almost hear the gears in his head turning desperately, trying to find a way to regain control. But it no longer played his game. A few minutes later, his phone rang. Of course, it was Veronica. I could hear him from the living room, speaking in a low, tense voice. "Yes, Mom. Everything's fine. Yes, of course. Something simpler today. A surprise." I could practically taste the falseness in his tone, the sheer panic hidden just beneath it. The man who always bragged about being in control, the provider, the head of the family, was now trapped in his own meticulously woven web. He hung up and looked at me with a fury I had never witnessed before. "Fix this, Marianne," he ordered. His voice was no longer arrogant. It was desperate. I simply shook my head. "I'm sorry, Leonard. You set the rules." With a calmness that even surprised me, I picked up my tablet, the same one he always dismissed as my little drawing toy. I opened the spreadsheet app where I had drafted my plan on Friday night and created a new document with a clean, professional design, just like the ones I present to my best clients. At the very top, I wrote, "Invoice for cooking and household management services." I began meticulously breaking down the costs. Menu planning, purchasing quality ingredients, preparation and cooking, 6 hours of labor at the rate of a private chef, table service, and cleanup. Each line had a value based on real market prices in New York City. The total was beautiful, neat, round, and absolutely fair. My work tool had become the instrument of my own justice. When the clock struck 1, I went to the refrigerator. I took out the salmon, avocados, and vegetables I had bought for myself. With steady, deliberate movements, I began preparing my own lunch. At the same time, I grabbed a roll of labels and a marker. I opened the Greek yogurt and wrote on a label, "Property of Marianne." I did the same with my coffee, my fruit, and my bottle of wine. It was a small, almost absurd gesture, but one bursting with meaning. I was drawing a line, not just in the fridge, but in our lives. He wanted separation, and I was giving it to him in the most literal way possible. I could hear his restless footsteps pacing through the living room, the rhythm marking time until the inevitable moment. The doorbell was about to ring, and I was ready. The show was about to begin. At exactly 1 o'clock, the bell rang, a sharp sound cutting through the silence of the house like a knife. Each vibration ran down my spine, not with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating sense of anticipation. It was the signal, the very moment I had been so meticulously preparing for. I watched Leonard leap from the sofa as if jolted by electricity. His face, pale and covered in a fine sheen of sweat, was a roadmap of pure panic. He ran to the door, smoothing his shirt, trying to plaster on a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was about to play his usual role, the perfect husband, the dutiful son, the confident host, the illusion of a happy family, the man of the house, without realizing that the foundations of his entire castle were about to crumble beneath him. From the calm of the patio, with my coffee still warm in my hand, I felt like I was watching a play. I was the director, and he was the tragic protagonist, utterly unaware that he was about to face the final, devastating act. The moment he opened the door, his transformation was instantaneous. His voice turned loud and artificially cheerful, that rehearsed tone I knew so intimately. "Mom, Dad, welcome. Come in, please." Veronica and Mr. Charles Bennett walked in with the self-assured confidence of people who truly believe they own the place. Veronica wore a flawless white linen suit that probably cost more than my last design invoice. She scanned the room, her eyes searching for me, and when she didn't see me, she lifted her chin in disdain. "How strange," she said loudly. "It doesn't smell like anything today. Usually, you can smell the roast pork from the entrance." Mr. Bennett, as always, remained silently observing, but his eyes swept the living room, noticing the stillness, the utter absence of a usual bustling activity that signaled their arrival. The first stone had been thrown, and I hadn't even moved. Leonard, sweating visibly, tried desperately to distract his parents. "Today, I wanted to give you a surprise, something different. Why don't you sit in the living room? Can I get you something to drink? A glass of wine? Maybe whiskey?" His attempt to act like the perfect host was truly pathetic. He never served the drinks. That had always been my unspoken job. Veronica ignored him completely and set her expensive designer purse down on the sofa I had chosen and paid for. Her goal was clear, and she wouldn't be distracted by a mere drink. "First, I'll go to the kitchen to see if Marianne needs help. She's probably overwhelmed by the surprise she prepared." The word surprise dripped with venomous sarcasm. To her, I was utterly incapable of doing anything right without her direct supervision, and she couldn't wait to find a mistake, any excuse to reassert her supposed superiority. With the unshakable determination of a general inspecting her troops, she headed straight for the kitchen. Leonard tried to stop her, placing a hesitant hand on her arm. "Mom, really, there's no need. I'll take care of it," he said, almost pleading. She brushed him off impatiently, like swatting away a bothersome child. "Don't be ridiculous. Leonard, I know your wife. She probably needs help." And without waiting for an answer, she walked toward the hallway. From my seat on the patio, through the glass door, I had a perfect panoramic view of the unfolding scene. I saw Leonard's stiff back, his shoulders slumped in utter helplessness. I didn't feel an ounce of pity for him. What I felt was a strange, almost pleasant calm. It was poetic justice. He had unleashed this storm with his arrogance, and now he would have to face the hurricane he himself had summoned, his mother. The serenity that filled me was so deep, it almost felt supernatural, the peace of knowing that for the very first time, the script was entirely in my hands. It was in that brief, suspended moment of silence, just before the storm broke, that I heard the sentence that sealed my decision. Mr. Bennett, who had stayed behind near the door, approached his son and asked quietly, "Everything okay, son? You look nervous." Leonard's reply was a venomous whisper, laced with contempt. But I caught every single word. "It's nothing, Dad. She's just being dramatic again. I had to put her in her place about the money. She'll get over it once she realizes she can't live without my credit card." Every word was another nail hammered into the coffin of our marriage. This wasn't an argument or a misunderstanding. This was how he truly saw me. A burden, a parasite, a woman who, in his deluded mind, couldn't possibly survive without him. At that precise moment, my plan stopped being a mere lesson. It became a life sentence. Veronica stepped into the kitchen. The silence that followed her entry spoke louder than any words could. I could vividly imagine the scene without even moving. Her eyes scanning the spotless white quartz counters, the dry, gleaming sink, the cold stove, the closed cabinets. Everything immaculate, like a magazine photograph, but utterly lifeless. She had expected the intoxicating scent of spices, the warmth radiating from the oven, the cheerful bubbling of pots. Instead, she found a sterile silence, the stark emptiness of a broken routine. I could almost feel her confusion, her mind racing desperately to find a logical explanation. Perhaps she thought the food was hidden in the patio oven, or that everything was simply ready and I was just waiting to serve. But that profound stillness had to be slowly eating away at her reasoning. Then came the scream. It wasn't just a startled shriek. It was a primal roar of pure fury, a guttural sound that ripped through the air and vibrated through the very walls of the house. It was the cry of a queen who had been brazenly defied, a matriarch who had not received her expected tribute. I heard the hurried footsteps of Leonard and Mr. Bennet rushing toward the kitchen. They entered to find Veronica standing rigidly in the middle of the tiled floor I had chosen, her face crimson, one trembling finger pointing accusingly at the refrigerator. Her expression was a terrifying mix of rage and disbelief, as if she had just uncovered an act of treason instead of an empty kitchen. The show had reached its first dramatic climax. Leonard's face morphed. Confusion gave way to blinding panic, then to a cold, hard fury as his eyes finally met mine. I stood calmly in the doorway leading to the patio, watching everything with a composure that must have seemed inhuman to him. In my hands was my tablet, my trusty work tool, that little drawing toy he used to mock. Its lit screen cast a soft, bluish glow over my face. The tension in the room was so thick, you could practically touch it. Mr. Bennet's gaze flickered from me to his wife and back to his son, trying desperately to make sense of the unfolding chaos. But Veronica needed no explanations. To her, the culprit stood directly before her eyes. Her small, dark pupils locked onto mine, burning with a fury that promised war. I knew I was about to face the unbridled wrath of a woman who had never once heard the word no. Before Leonard could stammer out an excuse or his father could intervene, Veronica caught her breath and spoke in a tone that sliced through the air like a whip. "Would you care to explain what this means, Mary Ann?" she spat, each word dripping with venomous disdain. "Is this supposed to be a joke? It's 1:15. Where's the lunch you were supposed to make?" The biting emphasis on supposed to said everything. To her, I wasn't family, I was staff. Her cook, her hostess, her personal guarantee of comfort. She didn't ask if I was okay, if something had happened. She only demanded her meal, her routine, her absolute right to be served in my own house. She was so utterly certain of her power over me that it never even crossed her mind that I might have a legitimate reason. Without saying a single word, I stepped forward. The silence in the kitchen grew heavier, almost oppressive. I lifted my tablet and slowly, deliberately turned the screen toward them. The document I had so carefully prepared on Friday night glowed with professional precision. At the very top, in an elegant font I had designed myself, the title read, "Invoice, Sunday Lunch Services." I let the image speak for itself. I saw confusion flicker across Mr. Bennet's face. Veronica's fury, for a fleeting moment, dissolved into pure bewilderment, and then raw terror flashed in Leonard's eyes. He, and only he, understood immediately what he was seeing. He had asked for financial clarity, and I was handing it to him on a silver platter. With a calmness so cold it seemed to chill the very air, I raised the tablet higher, allowing the bluish light of the screen to wash over their stunned faces. The silence in the kitchen pressed against my ears, a palpable weight. Mr. Bennet blinked repeatedly, as if trying desperately to focus on a reality that simply didn't make sense to him. Veronica, on the other hand, had transitioned from fiery anger to an absolute, blank confusion that seemed to erase every thought from her mind. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish out of water. But it was Leonard's face that stayed etched in my memory like a stark photograph. His skin was waxy and pale, his features tight and utterly drained of color. His eyes, fixed on the screen, held no anger, no wounded pride, only raw, naked fear. The fear of a man watching the carefully constructed house of cards of his control collapse with one simple breath of truth. Veronica was the first to break the deafening silence. She did it with a laugh, a sharp, hollow sound. It wasn't sincere or amused, but the nervous, almost hysterical reflex of someone trying desperately to regain control of the situation that was rapidly slipping away. "Oh, please, Mary Ann, What a silly joke, she said, feigning composure. Come on now. Stop the theatrics. Turn that thing off and tell us what you prepared for lunch. You must be hiding it somewhere to surprise us. She stepped toward me with that forced smile she used whenever she wanted to remind everyone who she thought was in charge. She lifted her hand to pat my arm, a condescending, almost maternal gesture. But I didn't move. Her hand met only empty air. Her smile vanished instantly. My eyes never left hers. It's not a joke, Veronica, I said slowly, my voice sounding strangely foreign, as if it didn't belong in that house, as if it were the voice of an executive in a boardroom, not a wife in her own kitchen. I spoke with a precise, deliberate cadence of someone presenting a professional report. As Leonard proposed on Friday, we've implemented a complete separation of budgets. And since family event catering was not part of our original agreement, it is now billed separately. The standard rate is $350, and it includes menu planning, the purchase of high-quality ingredients, 6 hours of labor at a private chef's rate in New York City, table service, and post-meal cleanup. Every word was cold, calculated, stripped bare of emotion. I was speaking their language. Money, numbers, transactions, the only language they truly respected. That's when Leonard reacted, not with words, but with a violent, lunging movement. He took a long step toward me, trying to snatch the tablet from my hands, as if destroying it could somehow erase the stark reality displayed on its screen. That's enough, Marianne. Give me that, he growled, his voice low and thick with barely restrained rage. What do you think you're doing? You're embarrassing us in front of my parents. His fury was entirely predictable. I had already anticipated it. I stepped back calmly, effortlessly keeping the tablet out of his reach. I looked him straight in the eye, without a single trace of fear. The woman who used to shrink at his shouting was gone. In her place stood an unshakable stillness, a cool, quiet calm that unsettled him even more than the invoice itself. Ridiculous, I said softly but sharply. Let me explain what's really ridiculous, Leonard. Ridiculous was you standing in this very room, telling me my comfortable life at your expense was over. Ridiculous is that you said it while standing on a floor I paid for, in a kitchen where every single appliance was bought with my money, inside a house whose down payment, 80% of it, came directly from my grandmother's inheritance. Each word landed like a hammer blow, precise and devastating. The impact was immediate. Mr. Bennett took a subtle step back, looking at his son with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. The carefully constructed story they had built for years, that of the model son supporting his struggling artist wife, crumbled to dust right before their eyes. Mentioning the inheritance was breaking a sacred taboo. Everyone knew it existed, but no one, not even Leonard, dared speak of it aloud. Veronica looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I was no longer just the insolent daughter-in-law. I was now a direct threat to her pride and to the carefully cultivated family reputation. You ungrateful woman, she hissed, her voice trembling with indignation. After everything we've done for you, we gave you a name, a place, a family. She tried to unleash her old, familiar weapons. Guilt, shame, the crushing weight of the status she believed she had graciously bestowed upon me. But those bullets, those hollow words, bounced harmlessly off the impenetrable armor of truth and self-respect I had finally forged. Without a word, I turned around slowly, deliberately, almost theatrically. I walked to the refrigerator, the one now filled with my neatly labeled items, and opened the door. The interior light illuminated a small army of tags bearing my name. It was a powerful image, the tangible symbol of my fiercely reclaimed independence. I took out a bottle of sparkling water, one of the expensive ones Leonard used to call a useless luxury. When I opened it, the hiss of carbonation sounded loud and defiantly clear in the suddenly silent kitchen. I took a long, slow sip, my eyes fixed firmly on them. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. The message was as clear as the sparkling water I was drinking. This is my space. These are my things, and I decide what happens here. My silence was my declaration of war. The calm on my face seemed to break something deep inside him. His expression twisted into a grotesque mix of fury and utter humiliation. He had lost control of the scene, of his captive audience, and most painfully, of me. Desperate to reclaim some semblance of authority, he resorted to his last, pathetic weapon, a threat. "This ends now, Mary Ann," he said, his voice trembling, barely holding back a growl. "You're going to turn off that damn tablet, apologize to my parents for this circus, and start cooking something, or I swear you'll pack your things and get out of my house right now." The words "my house" echoed hollowly, a final, pathetic attempt to assert an authority he no longer possessed. I turned slowly to face him, still holding the cold bottle in my hand, as cold and resolute as my decision. A small, steady smile, not mocking, just sure, appeared on my lips. I looked straight into his eyes, those eyes I had once loved, but that now reflected only the raw fear of a stranger, and let the silence stretch before I shattered his pathetic threat with surgical calm. "Allow me to correct you. Leonard," I said in a low, precise voice. "It's not your house. It's mostly mine. My inheritance money is legally recorded in the purchase." I dropped that truth into the kitchen like a bomb. The silence that followed was truly explosive. I saw a realization dawn, stark and painful, on Veronica's and Mr. Bennett's faces. They finally understood. They weren't looking at a rebellious wife. They were standing in front of the rightful owner of the very house they were in. Leonard was utterly speechless. His threat, his last desperate gamble, collapsed at his feet. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had flipped completely, irrevocably. I finished my water in one steady sip and added, just as calmly, "The offer still stands. $400 for the lunch service, or, if you prefer, we can start negotiating a rental agreement. I can draft it right now." I paused, then added with restrained irony, "That, of course, is also a billable service." My words hung in the air, suspended, before finally settling, heavy with undeniable truth. The shock seemed to absorb all the oxygen from the room. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, charged with the brutal reality we were all now facing. Veronica stared at me, eyes wide, her face shifting from disbelief to a rage so deep it seemed unable to escape her throat. Mr. Bennett stood motionless, his gaze fixed on me, no longer disapproving, but calculating, as if reassessing a failed investment. And Leonard was pale, almost translucent, as though my revelation hadn't just shattered his argument, but drained the very life from him. He stood there in the middle of my kitchen like a ghost, lost in the wreckage of his own disaster. Veronica was the first to explode, as expected, though her anger no longer carried the force it once had. It sounded like a storm that had lost its terrifying center. "You manipulative liar," she spat, though her voice lacked its usual commanding presence. "How dare you talk to us about money, about contracts? This is my son's house," she added, looking around as if that alone could reassert her crumbling power. "You've poisoned his mind," she went on, desperately clinging to her old script, the one where she was the undisputed queen and I was the ungrateful, servile maid. But now her words rang hollow, desperate, like blanks fired against a wall of concrete. The power she had wielded for years, built on guilt, duty, and shame, had utterly evaporated. The moment I confronted her fantasies with the hard, cold facts of financial reality, her power dissolved. I ignored her completely. She was no longer my focus. I turned my gaze instead to her husband, the quiet, almost invisible foundation of all their authority. I looked him straight in the eyes, a profound calm rising from deep within me. "Mr. Bennett," I said evenly, my voice clear and professional. "You're a businessman. You understand assets, liabilities, returns, and investments. My grandmother left me an inheritance, and with that money, I paid for 80% of the down payment on this property. Leonard contributed the remaining 20, and his salary covers part of the mortgage, while my income as a designer pays for maintenance and all household expenses." I paused, keeping my voice perfectly professional. "Tell me, as a man of numbers, Do you think it's fair that the majority shareholder of this asset be treated as an unpaid employee? I was speaking his language, the language of tangible value, of cold, hard numbers that leave absolutely no room for debate. Mr. Bennett didn't answer right away. His eyes shifted from me to his son, and for an instant, I saw a flicker of disappointment, a deep sadness cross his face. Then he turned toward his wife, whose expression was tight, distorted by a furious frustration. Finally, he looked back at me. His eyes no longer held disdain, but something new, something I hadn't seen before. A cool, assessing glance, almost a quiet respect. He didn't say a single word, but his silence was the clearest, most devastating response. In the court of logic and facts, the case was closed. It wasn't a victory for me. It was a life sentence for Leonard. His father, with that profound silence, had just confirmed everything I'd said, and that destroyed him. I saw him deflate like the air leaving a balloon. The arrogance, the fury, the pride, all of it vanished, leaving behind only a hollow, pathetic sadness. He ran a hand through his hair, desperately avoiding my gaze and his parents. "That's enough, Mary Ann," he whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible. "You won. That's what you wanted, isn't it? You won. You ruined Sunday. You ruined everything." It wasn't an apology. It was the whine of a child blaming someone else for breaking a toy he had already smashed himself. He blamed me for revealing the truth, not realizing that he was the one who had meticulously built the lie. To Leonard, my act of independence was an act of utter destruction. I slowly shook my head, and a shadow of genuine sadness passed through me. "I didn't ruin anything, Leonard," I said quietly. "I just held up a mirror. What you saw in it was already broken long ago. The only difference is that today, I decided to stop pretending I didn't see the cracks." I walked calmly to the kitchen island and set my tablet down on the quartz counter, the same pristine surface where my plan had first begun. My work tool, the one he used to belittle as my little drawing toy, now rested motionless, its purpose fulfilled. The invoice still glowed on the screen, like a digital epitaph for our marriage, precisely as it had been until that very day. I took my phone from my pocket, and since we're all so intent on treating everything as business, I said, looking directly at Veronica, "Allow me one last professional gesture." I dialed a number I knew by heart. A cheerful voice answered immediately. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" "Good afternoon," I replied in a polite, almost cheerful tone. "I'd like to confirm a reservation for 3 people under the name Veronica Bennett." "Yes, that's right. For lunch. Could it be on the terrace?" "Perfect. Thank you very much." I hung up and looked at them. Their faces were a portrait of utter confusion. "I've reserved a table for you at one of the most exclusive restaurants on the Upper East Side," I said evenly. "It's a gift from me. Consider it compensation for the inconvenience and for the catering service not provided today." It wasn't a gesture of peace. It was a gesture of undeniable power, an elegant, devastating dismissal. I was offering them luxury, the very same luxury they had always used to underline their perceived superiority. But this time, it came from me, not as a plea, but as an undeniable statement of hierarchy. The silence that followed was so deep, I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. Veronica opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Mr. Bennett watched me with a complicated expression, part surprise, part faint amusement, as if recognizing a true masterstroke. Leonard, on the other hand, sank further into his profound defeat. I hadn't beaten him with shouting or tears, but with precision, with a calculated courtesy that left him utterly unarmed, with no way out. He had lost on his own battlefield, power and status. "We're not going anywhere," Veronica stammered finally, looking desperately to her husband for backup. "Charles, for heaven's sake, say something. Do something." But for the first time in all the years I'd known them, Mr. Bennett didn't side with her. He shook his head slowly, with a quiet finality that left no doubt. "Let's go, Veronica," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I think Mary Ann has made herself perfectly clear." It was the final, crushing blow. The patriarch, the silent judge, had just delivered his verdict, and it wasn't in favor of his own blood. He had chosen reason over loyalty, truth over pretense. Veronica's face crumbled. In seconds, she seemed to age 10 years. She had been betrayed by her son, who hadn't defended the family's honor, and abandoned by her husband, who refused to fight a lost war. With clumsy, almost frantic movements, she grabbed her designer purse, that ridiculous symbol of a status that no longer existed, and without even looking at me, she walked past me toward the front door. Mr. Bennett followed her, but paused in the doorway. He looked at me for a long moment and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't an apology, nor was it approval. It was an acknowledgement, a silent communication between equals. Then he left, closing the door with a soft, definitive click. The echo of that sound lingered in the air, marking the end of one act and the uncertain, yet hopeful, beginning of another. Only Leonard and I remained in the silent house. He hadn't moved. He stood there in the middle of the kitchen, shoulders slumped, staring at the empty space his parents had just left behind. After a while, he finally lifted his head. His eyes no longer held anger, only confusion, loss, and the dawning, bitter understanding of what had just happened. The war with his parents had ended in total surrender. But the one between us had only just begun, and for the first time, in the profound silence of my kitchen, I felt utterly ready for it. Leonard still stood there, motionless, turned to stone, frozen in place, a desolate statue amid the ruins of his own self-made kingdom. The silence his parents left behind was heavier than any scream. I watched him for a few seconds, waiting for a reaction, a word, anything to break the stillness, but nothing came. He finally sat down on one of the stools of the island, the very same one where he had so confidently delivered his ultimatum 2 nights earlier, and buried his face in his hands. There was no anger left in his posture, only the crushing weight of total defeat. And in that instant, I didn't feel triumph or satisfaction. What filled me instead was a deep, quiet emptiness. The poignant recognition that the man I had once loved no longer existed, if he ever truly had. In front of me wasn't a husband, but a stranger sitting in my kitchen, mourning not the loss of his partner, but the loss of his audience. That night, we didn't speak a single word. I took my pillow and a blanket and settled into the guest room, the same one I used as my office. Closing that door was more final than any argument we'd ever had. It was the physical wall that symbolized the emotional barrier he had meticulously built for years. The next morning, when I came downstairs, he was already gone for work. On the quartz countertop lay a note in his rushed handwriting. "We need to talk." I didn't read the rest. I crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. We had talked enough. Now was the time to act. I spent the day contacting attorney Julia Harper, a brilliant lawyer specializing in real estate and divorce cases, recommended by one of my clients. The conversation was clear, direct, and surprisingly liberating. For the first time, I was planning for my future, not ours. A week later, I met Leonard, not at the house, but in the neutral setting of a coffee shop. I handed him a slim folder. It contained a copy of the property deed, bank statements showing the transfer of my inheritance money for the down payment, and a detailed proposal for asset division. Everything was organized into clean, precise spreadsheets, as meticulously presented as the invoice I had once shown his mother. I watched as he read. His face turned pale. In those cold, black and white numbers, the entire fiction that he had been the sole provider collapsed. Every figure was a mirror, reflecting a truth he could no longer deny. "Marianne, please," he whispered, looking up, his eyes pleading. "We can fix this. I promise I'll change. I'll set boundaries with my mother. I'll do anything." His promises sounded hollow, empty echoes from a past that no longer had a place in my life. The relationship with his parents disintegrated in the most predictable way. Veronica tried calling me a dozen times the next day, alternating between furious, self-pitying voicemails and falsely conciliatory messages. I didn't answer any of them. I blocked her number and Mr. Bennett's too. A few days later, I received an email from him. It was brief and formal. "We regret what happened on Sunday. Leonard has explained the financial side. We hope you can resolve your matters in the best way possible. It wasn't an apology. It was a strategic withdrawal. They knew they had lost their access, their influence, their privileges. They were simply cutting their losses. I never heard from them again, and their absence felt like opening a window after years of breathing stale, stagnant air. The fate of the house, that supposed nest of love that had become my gilded cage, was resolved with the same cold efficiency as everything else. On my lawyer's advice, I gave Leonard two clear options. He could buy out my share of the property, which would mean securing a mortgage for nearly 80% of its current market value, or we could sell and split the profit according to our documented financial contributions. Of course, he couldn't afford the first option. His salary, though decent, wasn't enough to sustain the illusion of luxury he loved to project without my capital. Reluctantly, he agreed to sell. Watching him sign the papers in front of Mr. Robert Thompson, the realtor, was the true quiet end of our marriage. There were no tears, no shouting, only the crisp sound of a pen signing the close of a story. 2 weeks later, while I was in a client meeting, he moved out. When I returned, half the closets were empty. His personal things were gone. On the countertop, he left his keys and a note. "I'm sorry. I never knew what he was sorry for. Humiliating me, destroying our marriage, or simply for being caught." Through a mutual friend, I later heard he'd moved into a small apartment near his office. Functional, charmless, cramped. His comfortable life was over, but not at my expense. It had collapsed under its own, unacknowledged weight. He wanted separate budgets and ended up with a separate life. The house sold quickly in New York City's competitive market. On closing day, I received a transfer large enough to guarantee not just security, but true freedom. With part of that money, I rented a beautiful loft in Soho, exposed brick walls, massive windows, and warm light flooding my new space. Marion Carter Design Studio. The rest I invested, carefully following Grandma Teresa's wise advice. Build your independence, not someone else's. My business began to truly thrive without the crushing weight of Sunday lunches, without the constant, draining pressure to seek approval that never came. My creativity took flight. I landed major clients, ambitious projects. What had once been merely my hobby became a solid, respected company. Now, when I sit in my studio with my tablet on my lap, I sometimes think about that white quartz kitchen, not with bitterness, but with quiet gratitude. It was the stage of my greatest humiliation, yes, but also, unequivocally, the stage of my liberation. These days, I cook only for sheer pleasure. I invite friends who genuinely enjoy my food and fill my home with laughter instead of harsh criticism. Leonard, Veronica, and Mr. Bennett are just characters in a distant story, shadows of another life. I wish them no harm. I simply wish them nothing at all. They occupy zero space in my present. The life I have now, I designed it myself with my own rules, my own colors, my own rhythm. Friday nights are no longer something I dread, but something I truly celebrate. Sometimes I order my favorite food. Other times, I open a special bottle of wine and work late on a project I'm passionately engaged with, simply because I want to. I look around at this space that is entirely mine, built with my work and my unwavering effort. And I finally understand what true wealth means. It's not in a huge house or a 3-course dinner. It's in the quiet peace of living by your own rules. My name no longer appears on makeshift labels inside a refrigerator. It's proudly engraved on my studio door, on my invoices, on my project contracts, and on the unbreakable contract of my own. Happiness. That's a value no one can ever measure or take away. If I learned anything from this whirlwind, it's this. Your worth is not an opinion others get to debate. It's not measured by a husband's approval, a mother-in-law's fleeting praise, or anyone else's validation. It is a fundamental fact. For years, I allowed their distorted perception of me to define my own. I let their blindness make me disappear. Their constant criticism convinced me I wasn't enough. I used to think that if I just tried harder, cooked better, kept the house impossibly spotless, they would finally see my worth. But the problem was never my effort. The problem was their profound inability to recognize it. The greatest lesson wasn't about teaching them my value. It was about reminding myself of it. The irony is that Leonard was right about one thing. It was indeed time to end the comfortable life at someone else's expense. He just picked the wrong person. The comfortable life was his, built on my inheritance, sustained by my invisible labor, and decorated with my emotional energy. He and his parents had been enjoying the benefits of a partnership where only one partner paid the full, exhausting price. My story isn't unique. Millions of women around the world are silent partners in their own lives, contributing invisible capital, time, energy, love, organization, assets that never appear on any traditional balance sheet. Yet, without them, everything would simply collapse. That invoice I showed on my tablet was never really about $350. It was a powerful statement of principles, a boundary I should have drawn long, long before. Putting a price on my work was never about getting rich. It was my way of making it excruciatingly clear that what I do isn't free. Sometimes the only way to make people truly understand the value of what you do is to show them the crushing cost of not having it. Boundaries aren't walls to keep others out. They are vital lines we draw to protect ourselves, to teach the world firmly and clearly how we deserve to be treated. And the hardest, most vital lesson of all is this. You are the one who must hold that pencil. No one else will ever draw the line for you. True strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it reveals itself in the quiet certainty of a firm, unwavering decision. My power didn't come from conflict. It was born in the deep, resolute calm of that Friday night, when his humiliation met not my tears, but my unwavering smile. We live in a society that teaches women to defend themselves through emotion, to cry, to beg, to explain. But there is immense, untapped power in logic, in serenity, in using the very tools of the system that tries to hold you down to set yourself utterly free. My tablet, that little drawing toy he once mocked, became my sword. My knowledge of home management and finances became my impenetrable shield. I didn't need to raise my voice. I simply presented the facts. And facts, unlike mere opinions, are not up for debate. By the way, if you're still with me, make sure to hit subscribe. More unbelievable stories are coming. And if you, listening to my story, have ever felt invisible, underestimated, or taken for granted, I want you to know something profoundly important. Your work, your effort, your time, they all matter, even if no one else is keeping count. Don't wait for humiliation to finally start valuing what you do. Start today. Make a mental list of everything you contribute, every task, every single detail you keep running seamlessly without recognition. Be your own accountant. Acknowledge your invisible capital, because the first, most crucial step toward earning others' respect is respecting yourself with a conviction that doesn't break for anyone. Your peace, your dignity, and your energy are priceless, and you don't need anyone's permission to claim them. My story found its ending, one that I wrote, produced, and financed myself. But I know there are thousands like mine still being written, stories unfolding every single day in kitchens, offices, and living rooms across the world. Mine ended with the sale of a house. But in truth, it began with the purchase of my freedom. And that's an investment that will never, ever lose its value. Today, my life isn't perfect, but it's entirely mine. And that ownership, the ownership of my independence, is the only one that truly matters. Have you ever had to put a price on your peace just to make someone understand its true worth? If my story about how I turned a kitchen into a boardroom and an invoice into a declaration of independence resonated with you, leave me a comment and tell me your experience. And if, like me, you believe that every woman deserves for her value to be recognized and never discounted, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Together, we can make sure that more stories of women who stopped serving dinner and started serving justice are finally heard. Thanks for watching. Take care. Good luck.